Welcome to Lyra Echo Stories, where every story echoes emotions, memories, and hidden truths. Step in and feel the echo of every tale.
The waiter set the plate in front of me like an apology he was too polite to say out loud. One piece of bread. Dry, pale, the crust already cracking at the edges. No butter, no oil, no knife. Around me, 200 guests at the Marymount estate lifted silver forks over filet mignon, roasted asparagus fanned across white china, red wine catching the candlelight. The smell of beef and rosemary drifted from every direction, heavy and warm, the kind of smell that makes your mouth work before your brain does. I sat at table 14, near the kitchen doors. Every time a server pushed through, a rush of hot air and clanking dishes hit the back of my neck. Darcy had assigned the seating herself. She'd told me this on the phone 3 weeks ago, her voice bright and careful. I put you somewhere cozy, Jem, near the back, so you won't feel overwhelmed. She came by now, mid-reception, her train gathered in one hand, the other holding a champagne flute like she'd been born with it. She paused at my table, looked at my plate, her lips pressed together in that shape that wasn't a smile, but performed the job of one. "Oh, Jem, I told them to give you something special." She tilted her head. Two of the women at my table, friends of Troy's mother, glanced at each other. I pressed my thumb against the bread crust. It crumbled, dry as chalk. Then my mother appeared. Lorene had a way of materializing at the exact moment a wound was fresh, like she could smell the blood. She leaned in close, her perfume sharp and floral, her fingers gripping my shoulder. To anyone watching, a mother comforting her daughter. Her mouth was next to my ear. "That's all you deserve." Her voice was flat, private, stripped of any performance. "You couldn't even keep a marriage together. Be grateful you got an invitation." She straightened, patted my shoulder, moved on. Darcy was already 3 tables away, laughing, and the server who'd brought my bread had vanished. I sat there with my hands flat on the tablecloth, the bread plate in front of me, an empty water glass that nobody had filled. The band was playing something with brass, a song about love and permanence and the kinds of promises my family had never kept. I cataloged it all: the bread, the placement near the kitchen, the empty glass, my sister's gown, custom, with hand-stitched lace that cost more than 3 months of my rent, my mother's new pearl earrings, a gift from Troy's family, which she touched every few minutes the way people touch things they're afraid of losing. The centerpiece on my table was smaller than the others. Cheaper flowers, even the decoration had been rationed. I cataloged it all, and I did not speak. That was the trick with my family. Speak and they'd use the words against you. Stay quiet and they'd read the silence however they wanted. Either way, they won. That was Friday evening, the rehearsal dinner. The wedding itself was the next day, Saturday, and by Saturday night, 200 guests would be sitting in this same ballroom, watching a screen light up with information that would turn Darcy's face the color of cold wax. But I didn't know that yet. On Friday night, all I had was a plate of dry bread and the familiar weight of being the daughter who showed up, spent too much on the gift, and sat where she was told. My name is Gemma Holt. I was 33, divorced for 8 months, living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Raleigh, where the radiator whistled every night at 2 a.m., and the walls were thin enough to hear my neighbor's cat crying for food. I worked as a forensic accountant at a firm called Whitlock & Associates, CPA, CFE, the kind of credentials that make people's eyes glaze over at dinner parties, which was fine because nobody at dinner parties ever asked me what I did anyway, especially not my family. My father, Glenn, died 3 years ago. 4 months from diagnosis to funeral, and in those 4 months, I drove to Charlotte every weekend, sat in the hospital room reading him newspaper articles about college football, fed him ice chips when he could no longer swallow water. Darcy visited twice. Lorene visited daily, but spent most of the time on the phone in the hallway, talking to the estate attorney about the trust. Glenn was the only person in the Holt family who looked at me and saw someone worth looking at. He set up a trust for me and Darcy, split 50-50, managed by a trustee he appointed. After he died, my mother petitioned the court to become trustee herself. I didn't fight it. I was deep in my own divorce from Paul, a man who left our marriage the way people leave hotel rooms, taking what was his and not looking back, and I didn't have the energy to fight on two fronts. I signed the consent form and told myself it would be fine. My mother would handle the trust. She was my mother. I drove 3 hours to the estate that Friday. I almost turned around twice. Once near Burlington when the gas light came on and I had to decide if the trip was worth the $38 to fill the tank. And again, on the long stretch of highway past Greensboro, where the pines crowded the road and the exit signs offered the possibility of simply going somewhere else. In my trunk was a crystal vase, $400. Wrapped in tissue paper I'd bought from a craft store because the department store gift wrap was another $15. That was the kind of math I did now. The math of a woman whose ex-husband got the house and the good credit score and left her with a 1-bedroom and a radiator that wouldn't quit. The vase was too expensive. The price tag said $400 and my checking account said $612. But the old pattern held. Spend more than you can afford. Hope it translates into love. Watch it fail. I'd been running this same transaction since childhood. Piano recital programs framed for my mother. Father's Day cards with hand-drawn borders. A savings bond I bought Darcy for her high school graduation that cost me my entire summer job earnings. Each one a deposit into an account that never accrued interest. I checked in at the hotel, a Hampton Inn 12 miles from the estate, because the on-site rooms had been reserved months ago for guests who mattered, and drove to the rehearsal dinner in a dress I'd bought at a consignment shop. It was a good dress. Black, simple, the kind of thing that says, I'm here, but I'm not competing. I'd learned to dress that way early. Any attempt at elegance around Darcy was interpreted as aggression. The rehearsal dinner was where the bread happened. After it, after Darcy's toast, where she thanked everyone who made this possible, without once glancing in my direction, after my mother air-kissed a line of Troy's relatives, while I bussed my own bread plate because the servers had been told, apparently, that table 14 was self-service, I went outside. I stood near a hedgerow that smelled like boxwood and recent rain. The night was warm for October, the kind of Carolina evening where the humidity hangs in the air like something half-said. My phone buzzed. A text from Reese Callahan, my college roommate at NC State. We'd kept in touch the way women do when their 20s burn away, and the friendship drops to birthday texts and occasional calls that last too long because there's too much to catch up on. Reese lived in Charlotte now, worked in banking compliance, spent her days making sure other people's numbers added up. The text said, Hey, weird question. Is your sister marrying Troy Prescott, the one in commercial real estate? Call me. Not over text. The space between reading a text and making the call can feel like a long time. I looked at the message twice. The cocktail noise drifted from inside the ballroom, laughter and clinking, and someone calling for another toast. I called. Reese picked up on the first ring, which meant she'd been sitting with her phone in her hand, waiting for me to respond. I flagged something at work, she said. Her voice had the careful edge it got when she was talking about numbers that didn't behave. His company, Prescott Capital Partners. There are transfers that don't make sense. Large sums moving into an entity tied to your family's trust. I pressed my phone harder against my ear. A couple walked past me on the gravel path, laughing about something, their shoes crunching. I can't give you details, Reese said. Compliance rules, you know how it is. But if I were you, I'd pull your father's trust documents. Tonight, before the wedding. Reese, what are you saying? I'm saying somebody is moving money out of your inheritance, Gemma. And it's been happening for over a year. I went back inside. I smiled at my mother. I ate the bread, every dry bite of it, because that was the language I'd been speaking my whole life. Take what they give you, say thank you, swallow. Then I drove to my hotel room and opened the box I kept in my trunk. I had been meaning to donate my father's papers for months. Old files, bank statements, the trust documents, manila folders with his handwriting on the tabs, all of it crammed into a cardboard box that smelled like his office at the plant, like oak desk and cold coffee and the mechanical pencils he kept in a cup by his phone. I hadn't been able to let go of it. The box rode in my trunk through the divorce, through 3 apartment moves, through a year of telling myself I'd deal with it next weekend. Now I was glad I never had. The trust amendment was near the bottom, underneath his tax returns and a folder of old birthday cards I'd sent him. A single page, dense with legal language I couldn't fully parse at 11 at night in a hotel room with fluorescent lighting and thin walls. But I could read numbers. Numbers are the language I speak fluently when everything else fails. The original trust, 50-50, split between Gemma and Darcy. Filed while my father was alive, notarized, clean. His signature at the bottom, the slanted G and H that I'd recognize anywhere. The amendment. Filed 6 months after his death. Darcy's share, 85%. Gemma's share, 15%. Filed by trustee, Lorene Holt. I sat on the hotel bed with the paper in my hands. 50-15. 35 percentage points carved out of my inheritance and handed to my sister while I was drowning in divorce proceedings and sleeping on an air mattress in an empty apartment because Paul kept the furniture. Nobody told me about the amendment. Nobody asked my consent. I learned this, in a hotel room, on the night before my sister's wedding, because a college friend happened to work at the right bank. I opened my laptop. My fingers moved before my brain agreed to the plan. I typed into the State Business Registry, Prescott Capital Partners, LLC, formed 14 months ago. Registered agent, Troy Prescott. Principal office. An address in Raleigh that matched a virtual mailbox service I'd seen in fraud cases, the kind you rent when you want an address that sounds legitimate but doesn't have walls. I cross-referenced against the trust account statements I had in the box. I'd been the executor's assistant during probate, a role my mother handed me because it involved work, and she didn't want to do it. I had copies of every statement from the first 18 months after Glenn's death. The transfers materialized on my screen. February, $47,000. May, $62,000. August, $38,000. All to Prescott Capital Partners, LLC. All authorized by trustee. Lorene Holt, $47,000. That was roughly what I earned in a year after taxes. Someone had moved that amount in a single transaction, and I was paying $38 a month for the premium plan on my streaming service because the basic plan didn't have the shows I watched to fall asleep. I stood up from the desk and walked to the window. The hotel parking lot was empty, except for my car and a pickup truck with a landscaping trailer. The highway beyond the lot was dark. Somewhere south of here, in Raleigh, my apartment sat empty with the radiator cooling and the neighbor's cat silent for once, and my forensic accounting certificates hung on the wall above a desk where I had done work for 100 clients and never once turned those skills on my own family. That was the thing about trust. Not the legal instrument. The other kind. The kind you give to people who share your blood and your last name and your memories of Christmas mornings and the sound of your father's laugh. I had trusted my mother to be my mother, and she had used that trust the way her co-conspirator used his investors, as a resource to be extracted. I called Reese at 1 a.m. She picked up immediately, which meant she hadn't slept either. Prescott Capital Partners, I said. I found the transfers. How much? $147,000 so far. In 3 transactions. February, May, August. A pause on her end, the pause of someone doing math. Then, those are quarterly. He's on a schedule. Check the investor disclosures. If Troy is taking money from a family trust and putting it into his fund without proper disclosure, that's not just shady, that's wire fraud. Reese told me something else that night. Her voice changed, went quieter, the way it did in college when she talked about growing up in Asheville with a father who smiled at neighbors and stole from clients. My dad ran an insurance fraud ring for 6 years, she said. I reported him when I was 23. My family hasn't spoken to me since. My mother sends a Christmas card every year with no return address. My sister blocked my number. She let the silence hold. I know what it costs to tell the truth about family. I also know what it costs to stay quiet. She gave me one more breadcrumb. Check the county filings in Wake County. Lien disputes are public record. If Troy's entity has any liens or disputes filed against it, there might be documents attached as exhibits. Emails, correspondence, things people forget, become public when they get filed with a court. I searched. At 2:30 in the morning, running on hotel coffee that tasted like rust and determination, I found it. A contractor lien dispute filed against Prescott Capital Partners over renovations to an office on Glenwood Avenue. The contractor claimed $28,000 in unpaid work. Troy filed a response, and attached to the filings as exhibits were emails. Emails between Troy Prescott and Lorene Holt. I read them with the same careful attention I bring to client audits, where every comma is potential evidence and every number is a story. The emails were casual, businesslike, the correspondence of two people running a scheme they considered routine. From Troy, March, the Q1 transfer is ready. I'll file the distribution report after it clears. From Lorene, March, just process the transfer. She won't notice. She never checks. She, me, the daughter who was too busy drowning in a divorce to look at trust statements. The daughter who'd signed a consent form and trusted her mother. From Troy, July. The fund needs another infusion before the next investor report. Can we move $75K? From Lorene, July. Do it. But keep the transfers under $50K each. Split it if you have to. Structuring. They were deliberately splitting transactions to avoid reporting thresholds. That wasn't carelessness. That was consciousness of guilt. By 3 in the morning, I had the full picture. Troy's fund was a shell. Investor returns were being paid with new investor money, the oldest structure in the history of financial fraud. The Holt Family Trust, my inheritance, had been the single largest source of capital. Total funneled from the trust over 18 months, $284,000. My rightful share of the original trust, at 50%, $142,000. The county filings confirmed what the numbers already told me. Lorene's name was on every authorization. Every transfer bore her signature. Troy executed them. And the money that was supposed to be mine, the money my father set aside before cancer took his voice and then his breath, had paid for this wedding. The venue deposit, the catering, the flowers, the custom gown with hand-stitched lace, the filet mignon en 2 cents plate, every plate except mine. I sat back in the hotel chair. The room was silent, except for the ice machine humming through the wall. My laptop screen glowed blue. I picked up the crust of bread I'd wrapped in a napkin and brought back to the room. I don't know why I took it. Maybe because it was evidence of what they'd been doing all along. I set it on the desk next to my laptop. $284,000. $142,000 of it mine. And a piece of dry bread bought with my own stolen money. I did the math one more time. Because the math is where I live when the rest of me can't function. $142,000 divided by my annual salary. Roughly 3 years of work. $142,000 divided by my monthly rent. 118 months. Nearly 10 years of housing. $142,000 divided by the $400 crystal vase I'd wrapped in craft store tissue paper and delivered to a sister who mocked it in front of her friends. 355 vases. 355 gestures of love, purchased with money my father meant for me, given to a woman who served me bread. The math didn't make me feel better. It made the shape of the theft specific, gave it edges I could hold. That was enough. I did not sleep. Instead, I opened a presentation program and began building a video. This was my language. Screen recordings of the public filings. The trust amendment, original and altered, side by side. The transfer records, dated and sourced. The emails, highlighted and annotated. Clean slides, professional formatting. The kind of work I do for clients who pay me $250 an hour to make their financial nightmares visible to judges and juries. The work calmed me the way it always does. This was the part of my life that functioned correctly. The part where my brain was an asset and not a liability, where the skills I'd spent a decade developing were valued at $250 an hour, and nobody called them boring or looked at their phone while I explained what I'd found. Documents don't lie or perform or serve you bread while smiling. A transfer record is a transfer record. An email is an email. The evidence says what it says, and no amount of charm or beauty or golden child status can make $284,000 in unauthorized transfers disappear from a ledger. I built the video the way I build every forensic presentation. Start with the original agreement. Show the deviation. Follow the money. Let the trail speak. The audience for this one would not be a judge or a jury or a partner at an accounting firm. The audience would be 200 wedding guests in formal wear, holding champagne, sitting at tables decorated with flowers, bought with stolen money. But the structure was the same. Truth is truth, regardless of the venue. By 7 in the morning, I had a video that was 12 minutes long, airtight, and devastating. I exported it to a USB drive. I showered. The water pressure in the Hampton Inn was better than in my apartment, which registered in that raw, oversensitive way. Everything was registering now, every comparison between what I had and what I was supposed to have. I put on the dress I'd bought for the wedding. Navy blue, modest, with a high neckline and sensible heels, the kind of dress invisible daughters wear to golden sisters' weddings. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and saw what my family always saw. A woman who faded into the background by design, who dressed to disappear, who took up exactly the amount of space she'd been allocated and not a centimeter more. I picked up the USB drive. It weighed nothing. It contained everything. I tested the video on my laptop one more time. Every slide loaded. Every number was correct. Every email was legible. The presentation had a logic to it that I found steadying, a beginning, middle, end that the events of my life had never possessed. For the first time in years, I had something my family couldn't dismiss. Not a feeling they could call jealousy. Not a complaint they could reframe as bitterness. Not a request for acknowledgement they could brush past. Numbers, documents, dates, public records. The language I speak, laid out in a format that needed no interpretation and left no room for the response my mother had deployed against every objection I'd ever raised. You're being dramatic, but a thread of something cold wound through the satisfaction. I imagined playing it. 200 people turning to look at a screen. Darcy in her wedding gown. My mother's face. The whispers afterward. Gemma ruined her sister's wedding. That sentence would follow me. It would be spoken at Thanksgivings I'd no longer attend, at family gatherings I'd never again be invited to, at Troy's sentencing hearing if it came to that. I would become the woman who destroyed a wedding, and the reasons wouldn't matter to most people. The spectacle would be the story. A text from my mother arrived at 10 a.m. while I was sitting on the hotel bed with the USB drive in my clutch and the doubt coiling in my stomach. Try to smile today. For once, don't make everything about you. I stared at the message. The preemptive strike. She was already blaming me for whatever discomfort I might cause, before I'd done anything at all. 25 years of that trick, and it still worked, the way a combination lock still opens when you know the numbers, no matter how old the lock gets. I put the USB drive in my clutch. I drove to the estate. The ceremony was outdoors, in a garden with white chairs arranged in rows on grass so green it looked artificial, an arbor wound with magnolia branches at the end of a gravel aisle. I sat in the third row, behind Troy's family, where a cousin I'd never met offered me a program and a bottled water without being asked. That small act of courtesy from a stranger hit harder than it should have. Darcy walked the aisle to Pachelbel's cannon. A breeze moved through the garden, and the magnolia leaves turned silver. and 3 women in the second row dabbed their eyes, and a flower girl I didn't recognize scattered petals with the serious concentration of a child performing surgery. Darcy was, I have to say this honestly, beautiful. She always had been. The kind of beauty that made rooms rearrange themselves, that made Lorene stand straighter and speak softer, that made our father's eyes go warm in a way they never quite did when he looked at me. He loved me. I never doubted that. But he admired Darcy, and there's a difference between love and admiration that children can feel long before they have words for it. I used to practice Darcy's expressions in the mirror when I was 12, trying to figure out what combination of features produced the response I wanted. I never found it. My face was my father's face, serious and angular, built for concentration and not for the kind of effortless warmth that made people lean toward Darcy like plants toward sun. Troy's voice during the vows was steady, practiced, the voice of a man who was good at saying things people needed to hear. He held Darcy's hands and promised fidelity, honesty, and partnership. I gripped the edges of my program until the paper buckled. Fidelity. The word sat in my ears like a stone. After the ceremony, during the cocktail hour between the garden and the ballroom, my mother found me near the coat check. Her eyes were narrow, her jaw set in the expression she wore when she was about to say something she'd been composing for hours. I saw you on your laptop last night. The hotel front desk said you were up until 3. I had work to do. Whatever you're planning, don't. She stepped closer. Her perfume was the same one she'd worn to my father's funeral, sandalwood and lily, and the smell of it made my teeth ache with a memory I couldn't place. This is Darcy's day. You will not ruin this. I'm not planning anything. Good. Because if you make a scene, I'll tell everyone about your divorce. About how Paul left because you were impossible to love. She delivered this the way she delivered everything that was designed to wound. Low, even, like she was reading instructions off a medication bottle. No malice in the tone, just dosage. She patted my arm and walked back toward the ballroom. I stood by the coat check for a long time. The coat check girl, maybe 19, glanced at me and then away, the polite avoidance of someone who heard something they weren't supposed to. My clutch with the USB drive hung from my wrist. Then I saw Troy. He was near the catering tent, 20 feet from where I stood, phone pressed to his ear, body angled away from the crowd. His voice was low, but the tent canvas carried sound the way fabric does when it's stretched tight against a frame, and I was close enough to hear fragments. The next distribution is after the honeymoon. Tell them 2 weeks. A pause. No, the capital's there. We restructured the inflow last month. It's clean. He was still running the scheme. At his own wedding, standing in a rented tuxedo in a garden full of magnolias, making promises to my sister with one hand and scheduling fraud with the other. The inflow he was restructuring was my father's money. The next distribution, 2 weeks after the honeymoon, would likely be another transfer from the trust, another slice of what Glenn Holt had set aside for his daughters while he was dying in a hospital bed and I was feeding him ice chips and reading him box scores from the Charlotte Observer. I stayed very still beside the catering tent. Troy ended his call, slipped his phone into his jacket pocket, and walked back toward the ballroom with the confident stride of a man who had never been caught at anything. He passed within 3 feet of me without seeing me, because I was standing in the shadow of the tent entrance, and people like Troy had spent their entire lives not seeing people like me. Something shifted behind my ribs. Not anger, exactly. Anger had been there for hours, a low hum like the hotel ice machine. This was different. This was the sound a lock makes when the last tumbler falls and the mechanism turns. Inside, cocktail hour was ending. Guests drifted toward the ballroom for dinner. I found the AV setup near the DJ booth, a standard projector and screen system installed for Darcy's photo slideshow, a montage of Darcy and Troy looking golden and inevitable in 30 different settings. I approached the tech, a young man in a black polo eating a dinner roll. Beautiful setup, I said. How does the projector connect? I'm curious. My firm does presentations. He showed me the input ports. USB, HDMI, a small control panel. He explained how the slideshow was cued. Simple. Accessible. I filed the information the way I file every piece of evidence, precisely, without reaction. Then Darcy found me. She was with a group of her friends, women with salon hair and confident posture, and the kind of manicures that cost what I spent on groceries. Women who had never been served bread at a family event. Jem, she said, and the friends' eyes flickered with recognition, the kind that said Darcy had talked about me in the way families talk about the disappointing one, with a smile that's really a warning. I wanted to thank you for the crystal vase. It was sweet. She let the word sweet hang in the air, stripped of its warmth. Very you. Troy's brother gave us a trip to Positano, but yours was thoughtful too. A woman behind Darcy bit her lip to keep from laughing. Two others exchanged a look. A trip that cost, if I had to estimate, somewhere between $8,000 and $12,000. Against a $400 crystal vase bought with money I didn't have by a woman wearing a consignment shop dress. The comparison didn't need to be spoken aloud, because Darcy had built the frame, and her audience filled in the picture, the way audiences always do when the performer knows her craft. That was kind of you to come, Darcy added, touching my arm with two fingers, the same gesture Lorene used, passed down like an heirloom. I know events like this can be hard for you. Since the divorce, and everything, everything was the masterwork. It implied a catalog of failures too long to enumerate. It suggested Darcy was being generous by not listing them. It positioned her as the compassionate sister, and me as the object of compassion, which is a different thing entirely from being the object of respect. She walked away. Her friends followed. One of them looked back at me with something that might have been pity and might have been curiosity, the way people look at car accidents. I excused myself from the hallway and found the women's restroom. It was ornate, the kind of restroom that belongs in an estate, with a settee and cloth hand towels and a mirror framed in antique gold. I stood at the sink and ran cold water over my wrists. My face in the mirror was composed, which surprised me, because inside I was running a calculation that had nothing to do with numbers. Play the video or walk away. Play it or walk away. The two options circling each other with no resolution. My phone rang. Reese. Gemma. I need to tell you something. Her voice had the compliance officer tone, the one that meant she was calibrating every word for accuracy and liability. I dug a little more after we talked last night. There's a complaint filed with the SEC. Anonymous, not from me. Troy's fund is already under preliminary review. I leaned against the bathroom wall. The tile was cold through the fabric of my dress. Whatever you're thinking of doing tonight, Reese said, the authorities are already looking at him. You don't have to be the one who does this. The rational justification collapsed, like a building losing its supports, one floor at a time. The SEC was already investigating. Troy would face consequences. Slowly. Through legal channels. The way consequences come for men in suits who steal with spreadsheets instead of weapons. The system would handle it. Probably. Eventually. Which meant that if I played the video tonight, it wouldn't be about protecting investors or reporting fraud or ensuring accountability. Those things were already in motion without me. If I played the video, it would be personal. It would be about the bread. About that's all you deserve. About every empty water, glass, and every seat near the kitchen door, and every time my mother looked through me like I was made of something transparent and unimportant. If I played that video, I was choosing revenge over reason, and every person in that ballroom would see the choice. I thanked Reese. I hung up. I left the restroom and walked down a hallway I'd never been down, deeper into the estate, past oil paintings of somebody's ancestors and wallpaper with faded roses. The estate was old, full of rooms that had been somebody's parlor or sitting room 100 years ago, rooms where the conversations had long since faded into the wallpaper. I found one that was empty. A small parlor with a cold fireplace, two wingback chairs in faded blue, and a window where October light came through the curtains in amber columns. Dust motes drifted. The room smelled like old wood and furniture polish. I sat down in one of the wingback chairs. The fabric was cool and slightly rough under my palms. I took the USB drive out of my clutch and held it, turning it between my fingers the way my father used to turn a coin when he was thinking. A habit I'd inherited along with his angular face and his way of going quiet when the stakes were high. $284,000 of evidence on a device that weighed less than an ounce. 12 minutes of slides that would take apart a wedding, a financial scheme, and whatever remained of my relationship with the two women who shared my last name. The room was very quiet. Distant music from the ballroom, a bass line I could feel more than hear, the scrape of my own breathing. And then I wasn't in the parlor anymore. I was 8 years old, standing in the doorway of our kitchen in the house on Elm Terrace, still wearing the cardboard crown I'd made for the school play. The play was Cassandra the Brave, and I'd had the lead because Mrs. Patterson said I had a clear voice and good timing, and I'd memorized every single line in the 3 weeks before opening night, practicing in the bathroom mirror while the shower ran so nobody would hear me. My hands were shaking because I was so proud and so scared, and my whole body was leaning toward the kitchen because I needed to tell my mother about the moment in Act 2 where I forgot my line and made one up, and the audience laughed. The good kind of laughing, the kind that means they're with you and not against you. Lorene was at the stove. She turned, saw me, and her face did the thing it did when I interrupted something she considered more important, which, when it came to me, was everything. "Oh," she said. "Was that today?" She turned back to the stove. Darcy's soccer game had run late. Darcy was in the living room, already talking about a goal she'd scored, and Lorene was asking questions through the kitchen doorway, the engaged questions, the questions that mean you matter. My father was working a double shift at the plant. The house smelled like pasta water, and Lorene's sandalwood perfume, and the Elmer's glue on my crown where the tape was already coming loose. I stood in that doorway long enough that my legs started to ache. The crown was gold spray paint over cardboard. I'd cut it with safety scissors. The points were uneven, one taller than the others, but I'd been so proud of them because they were mine, and I'd made them myself. Nobody asked about the play. Not that night, not the next day, not ever. I went upstairs. I put the crown under my bed, and I don't know what happened to it after that. It was gone by the time we moved, or maybe it dissolved the way things do when nobody keeps them. I was back in the parlor, October light, the USB drive in my hand. My face was wet, which caught me off guard, because I hadn't authorized that particular response, and my body had gone ahead and done it anyway. 25 years. I had spent 25 years standing in doorways, waiting for someone to turn around and ask about the play, waiting for the right gift, the right achievement, the right degree, the right career, the right amount of silence to finally earn a seat at the table where the good food was served and the glasses were full and people turned toward you when you spoke. The bread wasn't the insult. The bread was the truth. They had been serving me dry bread my entire life. Different plates, different occasions, but always the same message. This is what you get. This is what you're worth. Be grateful you got anything at all. I wiped my face with the heel of my hand. My chest ached in the place where old grief lives, down near the bottom of the lungs where breath gets thin and the body stores the things the mind won't carry. The girl in the cardboard crown was gone. She'd been standing in that doorway since 1999, waiting for a turnaround that was never coming, and I was closing the door now, not slamming it. Closing it the way you close a door on a room you no longer live in. Firmly, without looking back. The video wasn't about making them love me. That door had been closed from their side for decades, and I'd been knocking on it like it was still open. The video was about the truth. $284,000 taken from my father's trust. A wedding funded with stolen money. A family that served bread to the daughter they'd robbed and called it a favor. Their response to the truth was their problem, not mine. I stood up. My legs were stiff from sitting, and my hands had left damp prints on the chair arms. I smoothed my dress, the navy blue consignment shop dress that my family would remember forever as the thing I was wearing when I took their world apart. I put the USB drive back in my clutch. I looked at the parlor one more time. The cold fireplace, the faded chairs, the amber light fading toward gray as the sun dropped below the tree line outside. This room would hold what happened in it for me alone. Nobody else would know about the 8-year-old in the crown, or the 25 years of doorways, or the moment when I stopped waiting. That was mine. I walked back toward the ballroom. Dinner had been served. The speeches were beginning. The best man, Troy's college friend, was at the microphone telling a story about a spring break trip to Myrtle Beach that was supposed to be charming. I moved through the room along the wall, behind the rows of round tables, close to the AV setup. The tech was eating a plate of food near his station. I approached him during the best man's toast, while the room's attention was elsewhere. "I have a short video," I said, "a surprise for the bride from the family." Darcy wanted it after the toasts. He didn't question it. He was 22, maybe 23, working a Saturday night wedding for hourly pay, and family surprises were part of the playbook. He helped me connect the USB drive. The projector was off, the screen blank, waiting for Darcy's photo slideshow that was scheduled for later. I texted Reese, "I'm doing it." Her response came in under 10 seconds. "I know. Be careful." Then, a moment later, and "Gemma, the bread thing was never about you. That was about them." The maid of honor gave her speech. A polished 3 minutes about friendship and fate that could have been about any couple anywhere. Then Darcy stood, radiant, champagne in hand, her face lit with the happiness of a woman whose life, from where she stood, was exactly as it should be. "Is there anyone else who'd like to say a few words?" I stood up. I walked across the ballroom. My heels were quiet on the hardwood, and the room was still half engaged with dessert and side conversations, so only a few heads turned at first. I reached the microphone stand near the head table. Darcy saw me coming, and her smile flickered. Just barely, the way a light flickers when there's a problem in the wiring that hasn't shown up yet. "I'd like to say something," I said into the microphone. 200 faces turned, some curious, some polite, some already reaching for their wine. My mother, at the head table, set her champagne down and watched me with the absolute stillness of a person who senses movement in tall grass and doesn't yet know what's causing it. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight to celebrate Darcy and Troy. And I want to share something about our family." I nodded at the tech. He turned on the projector. The screen behind the head table lit up. White background, clean typography. The first slide. Holt Family Trust. Established by Glenn Holt, 2020. "My father set up a trust for both his daughters before he passed away," I said. My voice was steady. The forensic accountant voice, the one I use in depositions and courtrooms. The voice that doesn't shake because numbers are precise, and I was speaking numbers now. The original terms split the trust equally. 50% to me, Gemma. 50% to Darcy. Second slide. 2 documents, side by side. The original trust agreement and the amendment. Original, 50/50. Amended, 85/15. Filed 6 months after Glenn Holt's death. Authorized by trustee, Lorene Holt. After my father died, the trust was amended without my knowledge or consent. My share was reduced from 50% to 15%. The ballroom went quiet, not the polite quiet of a speech. The airless quiet of a room where 200 people are simultaneously holding their breath. Third slide. Transfer records. Dates, amounts, source, and destination. Column A, Holt Family Trust. Column B, Prescott Capital Partners LLC. Over the past 18 months, $284,000 was transferred from the Holt Family Trust to a company called Prescott Capital Partners LLC. I paused, the way I pause during depositions when I want a number to land in the bones. That company is owned and operated by the groom, Troy Prescott. Troy's face changed. The easy confidence drained from it like water from a cracked glass. $284,000. I let it sit the way I let numbers sit in depositions, giving the figure time to expand in people's minds, to translate from digits into meaning. More than 2 years of take-home pay for the average worker in this state. Enough to buy a house in some of the counties an hour from here. My share of that money, the $142,000 that my father intended for me, funded this celebration. I looked at the room, at the flowers on every table, the crystal stemware catching the candlelight, the band sitting still on the stage with their instruments lowered, the remains of filet mignon on 200 plates. The flowers, the band, the venue, the filet mignon. I paused, took one breath. I got bread. The silence was so complete that I could hear the ice settling in the water pitchers on the tables. Darcy was on her feet. Her face had gone the color of old paper, and the champagne glass was still in her hand, tilted at an angle, wine running in a thin line down her wrist and onto the tablecloth. She made a sound that started as a word and dissolved into something raw. "Turn it off," she said. Then louder, her voice cracking at the seams. "Turn it off!" Troy stood so fast his chair hit the floor behind him with a crack that echoed. "This is defamatory. This is lies. You can't do this. This is my wedding." My mother's face was something I'd never seen before. The mask was gone. Underneath it was fear, pure and exposed. The expression of a woman who built a narrative over 30 years and was watching it collapse in real time. She gripped the edge of the head table with both hands, and her mouth opened and closed twice before sound came out. "Gemma, you ungrateful. Your father would be ashamed of you." "My father split the trust 50-50, I said, steady, into the microphone. "Someone changed it after he died. The documents are on the screen. Fourth slide. The emails. Troy and Lorene, their words projected for 200 guests to read. Lorene's line, 18 inches tall on a 10-foot screen. Just process the transfer. She won't notice. She never checks." A ripple went through the room. Not a gasp, exactly, but the collective sound of people recalibrating what they were seeing. At table 3, an older man rose slowly from his chair. Troy's uncle, Arthur Prescott, retired estate attorney, 35 years of practice in Raleigh. He stood with the measured deliberation of someone who had spent a career reading documents, and he read the screen now with that same focus, his lips moving slightly, his napkin still in his left hand. He turned to Troy. "Troy." His voice carried the authority of a man who was accustomed to being heard. "Tell me, this isn't what it looks like." Troy's mouth was working. Fragments came out. "It's complicated, and she doesn't understand the investment structure, and this is completely taken out of context." The standard responses of a man who built a career on the assumption that nobody would ever check. Arthur Prescott looked at the screen again. His lips moved as he read the email one more time. "She won't notice. She never checks." Then he looked at his nephew, and whatever Troy saw in his uncle's face made him stop talking mid-sentence. Arthur picked up his napkin, folded it once with the precise movements of a man who had spent 35 years organizing the chaos of other people's mistakes, and set it on the table. He sat down without another word, which was, in its way, the loudest thing anyone said that night. At the table nearest the door, a woman I didn't know turned to the man beside her and said, loud enough to carry, "The bread." She got bread, and the man stared at his own plate, at the remains of his filet mignon, and pushed it away. I set the microphone down on the stand. I picked up my clutch. I did not look at Darcy. I did not look at my mother. I did not look at Troy, whose voice was rising behind me, arguing with someone, maybe Arthur, maybe the air. I walked out of the ballroom, my heels on the hardwood, the swish of the door as it swung closed behind me, the sound of my own breathing, which had stayed even through all 12 minutes and was only now starting to fracture. Behind me, the sound rose. Darcy crying, a jagged sound like something tearing. Troy shouting at the AV tech to turn off the projector. Arthur's voice, low and firm. "Sit down, Troy. Sit down." And beneath all of it, the murmur spreading from table to table, the slow-moving wave of 200 people understanding that the meal they'd just eaten was paid for with someone else's stolen inheritance. Outside, the October air was cool and smelled like turned leaves and distant wood smoke. Crickets sang in the hedgerows. The gravel crunched under my heels as I crossed the parking lot. My rental car was under a magnolia tree at the far end. I got in, put my hands on the wheel. They were shaking, a fine tremor from the wrists out, which I allowed because nobody was watching, and shaking was the honest physical response to what I'd just done. My phone buzzed. "Reese, how are you?" I typed back, "I don't know yet." I started the car. The engine turned over and the dashboard lit up, the gas gauge at 3/4. Enough to get back to Raleigh without stopping. The radio came on, tuned to a station playing something soft that I switched off because silence was what I needed. The specific kind of silence that exists only in a car at night on a country road where nobody knows where you are, and the darkness outside is total and impersonal and makes no demands. I pulled out of the parking lot and onto the 2-lane road that led back toward the highway. The headlights caught the white line at the edge of the asphalt, and I followed it the way you follow a line of text in a document. One word at a time, one foot of pavement at a time, until the meaning accumulates and you arrive somewhere you didn't start. In the rearview mirror, the Merrimon estate shrank. The golden light from the ballroom windows got smaller. The magnolia tree disappeared behind a curve in the drive. I adjusted the mirror, tilted it so I could see the road ahead instead of what I was leaving behind. I drove. 4 months later, I was at my desk in Raleigh. February. Tax season had started, and my office at Whitlock & Associates was the familiar geography it always was this time of year. Coffee cups in various stages of completion, client folders stacked by deadline, the hum of the HVAC system that replaced the radiator's whistle when I moved to a bigger apartment in January. 1 bedroom still, but the radiator worked, and the walls were thick enough that I couldn't hear anybody's cat. A letter from an estate attorney named David Kwan had arrived 2 weeks earlier. Lorene Holt had been removed as trustee of the Glenn Holt Family Trust by order of the Wake County Superior Court. A neutral third-party trustee, a retired CPA named Margaret Foss, was reviewing the entire trust. The $284,000 in transfers was being traced and a clawback petition filed. Troy's fund had collapsed in January after the SEC investigation became public, announced in a brief paragraph in the Raleigh News and Observer that I read 4 times. Criminal charges were pending. Wire fraud, securities violations, breach of fiduciary duty. The attorney's letter was dry, factual, written in the language of consequence that I'd spent my career reading. Darcy called once, 3 weeks after the wedding. I was at the grocery store, standing in the pasta aisle, comparing the price of 2 nearly identical jars of marinara, when her name appeared on my phone screen. I let it ring through to voicemail. Her message was 22 seconds long. "You ruined my life, Gemma. I hope you're happy." Her voice cracked on the word happy, and for a second I heard something underneath the anger, something younger and more frightened, the voice of a girl who had never been told no, and was hearing it for the first time in a language she couldn't argue with. Numbers. I almost called back. My thumb hovered over her name for a full minute in the pasta aisle while an elderly man reached past me for a jar of ragu. I listened to the voicemail once more. I deleted it. I did not call back. My mother had not called at all. Not once. In 4 months. At first I checked my phone compulsively, the way you check a wound to see if it's still bleeding. By December, I stopped checking. By January, I changed my ringtone so that the sound of an incoming call no longer triggered the reflex of hoping it was her. Lorene's silence wasn't absence. It was strategy. She was waiting for me to break first, to call and apologize, to drive back to the estate of whatever dysfunction she was maintaining, and stand in the doorway one more time with a gift and an apology on my lips. She'd done this before, after every disagreement, every holiday that went wrong, freeze Gemma out until Gemma came crawling back, because Gemma always came crawling back. I was not coming back. The doorway was closed. The girl with the crown was gone. I started seeing a therapist in December. Dr. Colvin, Tuesday evenings, a small office on Oberlin Road, with a window that faced a parking lot and a ficus tree that was losing its lower leaves in the slow decline that seemed to be mandatory for therapists' office plants. She was direct, which I appreciated. She didn't use the words I'd been taught to flinch from. She asked questions and then let the silence do the work. During our third session, I told her about the cardboard crown. She listened with her pen resting on her notepad, not writing. "What would you say to the girl in the doorway?" she asked. I opened my mouth, and nothing came out. The answer was somewhere inside me, large and complicated, and the doorway of language was too small for it to pass through yet. "I'm working on it," I said. Dr. Colvin nodded. "Take your time." In February, Reese drove down from Charlotte for a weekend visit. She'd taken a new position at a different bank, smaller, in the community lending division, where the stakes were lower and the people were better, and nobody's nephew was running a Ponzi scheme out of a virtual mailbox. We went to a restaurant downtown near the warehouse district, a place with exposed brick and warm lighting and a chalkboard menu where nothing cost more than it should and nobody was trying to perform. Reese ordered filet mignon with an exaggerated sweep of her hand that nearly knocked over the water glass. "With all the fixings," she told the server. "Every single side dish you have. The works. I want the full experience." The server laughed. I laughed too, a laugh that came from below the ribcage and arrived without warning, involuntary, unplanned, and impossible to fake. The week before, the court-appointed trustee, Margaret Foss, had called me. She had a careful, measured voice, the voice of someone who had spent decades handling other people's money with respect. She told me something I didn't expect. My father, in the original trust document, had included a secondary provision that Lorene never activated, perhaps deliberately, perhaps through negligence, perhaps because she didn't want me to have what Glenn intended. The provision established a scholarship fund, administered by the elder daughter, funded with $200,000 from the trust principal. The Glenn Holt Scholarship for first-generation college students in Wake County, administered by the elder daughter. He'd written it that way, not by name but by role, because names can be contested but birth order cannot. The elder daughter, me, the provision had been buried in Section 7C of the original trust document, the kind of clause that requires careful reading to find, and Lorene had either never read it or read it and chosen to pretend it didn't exist, which amounted to the same thing. Margaret Foss read the provision to me over the phone. Her voice was steady and respectful, the voice of someone aware that she was delivering information that mattered enormously to the person hearing it. When she finished, there was a silence on the line, the kind of silence that happens when someone has just been handed something they'd been missing without having the words for it. "Your father planned this carefully," Margaret said. "He wanted you to have this role. 3 years after his death, Glenn Holt was still the only member of my family who saw me. My father had designed a role for me, doing the kind of work that doesn't make rooms rearrange themselves, but builds floors under people's feet. He saw me, even from inside a trust document, even from inside the precise legal language that was his only remaining voice." The waiter set a breadbasket on our table. Reese slid it across to me with both hands, a small ceremony. The bread was warm, fresh, rosemary and olive oil, baked that day, the steam rising from the break where I tore a piece free. I held it, 2 times at once. This restaurant, with the warm bread and the good light, and Reese across from me telling a story about a compliance audit that involved a man who tried to hide $2 million in a Venmo account under his dog's name. And that ballroom, 4 months and a lifetime ago, with the dry crust and the empty glass and the smell of beef I wasn't supposed to eat. What I valued was different now. Then, all I had in me was a hunger for a seat at their table. Any seat, even near the kitchen doors, even with a plate of bread while 200 others had filet mignon. I would have taken the bread and said thank you if it meant my mother turned toward me once with something warmer than assessment. Now I sat at my own table. Food I chose, in a restaurant I chose, with a person who called me at 1 a.m. because she cared what happened to me. Nobody assigned this seating. Nobody assigned my portion. The bread in my hand was something I reached for myself, not something served to me as a verdict. There was a pattern to the whole arc of my life. visible now the way a road is visible from a high place. Every holiday I attended, every gift I wrapped, every dollar I spent trying to earn a spot was the girl in the cardboard crown standing in the doorway, waiting for someone to turn around. The thing about that kind of waiting is that you can do it forever. Nobody stops you. Nobody tells you the person at the stove is never going to turn around, because telling you that would require them to admit they saw you standing there. I stopped myself. On a Saturday night in October, in an empty parlor, holding a USB drive, I told myself the thing nobody else was going to say. She's not turning around. She was never going to. I didn't miss them the way I expected to. I missed the idea of them. The mother who would have come to the school play and sat in the front row and cried at the end. The sister who would have saved me a seat at her table and filled my glass without being asked. Those women never existed. Grieving people who never existed is a thin, strange kind of sadness, like missing a house that was only ever a drawing in crayon, something a child sketched on construction paper and taped to the fridge, and nobody ever built it, and the tape lost its hold years ago. Reese was still talking. The compliance story had reached its conclusion. Something about the Venmo account and a very confused IRS agent, and she was laughing at her own punchline, which she always did, and I loved that about her. I took another piece of bread. The steam had gone, but the bread was still warm in my hands. I was working on it. The girl in the doorway. What I would say to her if I could go back. If time folded the way it does in these quiet moments between one bite and the next. Maybe just this. Put down the crown, sweetheart. Walk inside. Make your own dinner. It's better when you make it yourself.
Thank you for being part of Lyra Echo Stories. If this story stayed with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because every echo never truly fades.